discussing the minhagim of Avelos, and you'll recall that virtually all of the minhagim, except a certain minhag of Sfardim, considers Lag BaOmer to be a special day in which the Avelos of the Sfira ends. Now, I did mention a minhag of many Sfardim that actually Rabbi Akiva mentions, Mechaber himself mentions, that they observe 33 full days of mourning from the second day of Pesach through Lag BaOmer, and then they matter Sfira, the Sfira restrictions, from the 34th day of the Omer. But every other minhag, even the minhag of the Arizal that goes 49 days straight, does have a hiatus or a break in Lag BaOmer. Now, the idea of where did Lag BaOmer become a festive day, why did it become a festive day? So there are two different cheshbonos why Lag BaOmer became a festive day. Reason number one is that there's a tradition that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on Lag BaOmer. Now there's a machlokas. If I say Lag BaOmer is the end of the Avelos, so the pshat would be that's when they stopped. Of course, you could ask a question. Well, they stopped because there was nobody else left to die. I mean, if Rabbi Akiva had 24,000 students, and they all died, and they stopped dying in Lag BaOmer, so is that a simcha? Because, I mean, nobody's left. But the short answer is that this was a magefa. The magefa could have spread to other circles. Remember, Rabbi Akiva did start with 5 talmidim. And by the way, we sometimes don't pay attention to that part of the story. It's an amazing thing. You struggle for 24 years to become a Talmid Chacham, to become a great person. Your wife suffered for all of that period. You finally achieved such amazing hatzlacha, the greatest gadol in Klal Yisrael, 24,000 students. Now everything is worthwhile. All of the sacrifices were worth it. And then everything is taken away. Everything collapses. Everything goes into dust. Besides the intrinsic tragedy of the 24,000, imagine the personal tragedy to Rabbi Akiva and his wife. One could have easily understand a nervous breakdown. One could understand giving up. One could understand what's the point of starting again. And one of the aspects of Rabbi Akiva that is so great is that even though his entire world was destroyed, he started again. He started with 5. There's quite a difference in 24,000 and 5. But he said, I'll do what I can do. And this really is the history of the Jewish people. That even when our worlds get destroyed, whether it's the Churban Beis HaMikdash, whether it's the Bar Kokhba revolt, whether it is the Crusades, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's the wars that we face even today, Am Yisrael does not give up. We go on. We rebuild. We keep on going. We create. Many of you might have parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, great aunts, great uncles, may have survived the Holocaust. People who lost their whole families, but they came and they started again. They didn't give up. And that's one of the lessons of Rabbi Akiva we sometimes don't appreciate. To start with 5, you do what you can. No, there was a great Rosh Hashiva who had been a Rosh Hashiva in Europe, and he came to America actually before World War II, Rav Shlomo Hyman, who was Talmid Muvak of Rav Baruch Ber Lebovich. And Rav Shlomo Hyman became the Rosh Hashiva of Torah V'das. My own Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Kalevsky, was a Talmid of Rav Shlomo Hyman. And when Rav Shlomo Hyman became Rosh Hashiva, there weren't a lot of yeshivas in America, and there weren't a lot of students in any given yeshiva. And he was giving a shir to like 5 people or something, and he was very excited, he was very animated. So one of his chaverim, someone who knew him from Europe, said, listen, in Europe you were giving a shir to 300 people. Okay, I understand, you get excited. You're giving a shir to 5 people, like what are you so excited for? So he said, I'm not giving a shir to 5 people. I'm giving a shir to all of the dairas that are going to come out of these 5 people. These 5 people are going to have families. These 5 people are going to become Marbitzei Torah. They're going to have Talmidim. I'm not just looking at the people in front of me. I'm looking at the seeds that I'm planting and what is going to come out of all of this. So, you see 5 people. I see 10,000 people. Rabbi Akiva had the same perspective. He's teaching Torah to 5 people. A cynical person might say, what's the point? And yet, the whole shalshelis, the whole chain of Torah Shebal Peh, the Mishnah eventually, and then the Gemara, and all of the learning, Rashi and Tosfos, and Rambam and Ramban and Rabbi Akiva and the Vilna Gaon, exist in Klal Yisrael only because Rabbi Akiva did not give up. But be it as it may, Lag BaOmer, it is said, was the day that the Magefa stopped. According to some minhagim, we assume it didn't continue afterwards. According to other minhagim, it just stopped on that day, but it continued afterwards. So Lag BaOmer is a day of simcha because it is the day that the Magefa of the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva stopped. That is reason number 1 for the 33rd day of the Omer, why it became a simcha day. There is reason number 2, which is connected to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was not of the original Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the 5 that Rabbi Akiva rebuilt. And it is said, although there's a lot of questions about this, that Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit, the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died. So the question you'll ask is, well, why should that be a day of celebration? Because it's the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died, because it is brought down that the day that he died, he was megala, he revealed to his Talmidim the great, great mystical secrets of the Torah that are embodied in the Sefer HaZohar. So it's not like he wrote the Zohar, meaning he taught the teachings and the Talmidim wrote down the Zohar. And therefore the day that he died, it's called Hilula, the praiseworthy day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is the day that an Ohr Gadol, a tremendous light, was revealed to the world. The light of what's called the Panemius HaTorah, the inner dimension of the Torah, the Sodos of the Torah, the Zohar HaKadosh, and that is the source of the idea of the pilgrimage to Meron, because we know Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's kever is in Meron. Meron is right next to Tzfat, and next to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is his son, Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Shimon. And the minhag of going to Meron on Lag BaOmer is gebayt on the idea that this is the yahrzeit of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and every yahrzeit, like every tzaddik's yahrzeit, the neshama comes down to earth, and you can connect to it. You could be mushba, you could be elevated by it, and the like. Now, the truth of the matter is, the makor of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai dying in Lag BaOmer is from the Kisvei Ari. But some people have actually said it was a printing mistake, because the original printing of the particular sefer said Yom Simchas Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Lag BaOmer is the day of the rejoicing of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, that's a very ambiguous phrase. In a later printing, it took out the ches from the word Simchas. So if you can visualize this, Simchas without the ches can be read Yom Shemes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So some have argued that the idea that Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit was based on an erroneous interpretation of the omission of the letter ches in the printings of Pri-Eitz Chaim that came later, and the original nusach was Simchas Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. But the question still becomes, okay, let's go with the original Girsa. Simchas Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What is he referring to? Well, number one, Simchas itself could refer to the yahrzeit because the day of revelation, so we're not really sure, or it was just the day that he taught the Zohar, even if that wasn't his yahrzeit. So it's not so pashut. And I want to point out that the idea of going to Meron and Lag BaOmer is a fairly recent innovation, meaning it's certainly at the earliest, it's from the Arizal, which is already a few hundred years old, but many say that the widespread going to Meron is like 100, 150 years old. It's not really beyond that. And I don't know, this year, of course, it's especially complicated a little bit because BaOmer is Thursday night, Friday, right? And the traffic jams are horrendous. I don't know if anyone is going to Meron, but you don't want to, the last thing you want to do is be stuck in a huge, massive traffic jam on Erev Shabbos, where you might have to have Shabbos on the side of the road or something. So I don't know what people are planning this year, but one has to be very, very careful, especially when it's Erev Shabbos, not to get stuck. In fact, there's even halachic shilas. Even if you have a way of getting home in Shabbos, but if all of these traffic jams are going to cause police to have to be on the roads Friday night, it's not so pashut that for your mitzvah of going to Meron, you have the right to cause other people to engage in extra Chilul Shabbos. But putting aside the Erev Shabbos problem, obviously in Meron, you have, 2 years ago there was Rahman al-Islam, very, very great tragedy, but people are going back to Meron, and you have hundreds of thousands of people. And some have said Meron is so crowded on Lag BaOmer that even Rabbi Shimon leaves town. He's not there. Some say he's not there anymore. He's not going to be there with the carnival atmosphere. So it's an interesting thing. If you've ever been to Meron when it's not Lag BaOmer, quiet. You can go to the kever. You can go to the kever of Shimon Chai. You can have the whole kever to yourself, and not totally for yourself. There'll be some people there, but you can be there for 3 hours. Mamish daven at the kever. Mamish connect. Lag BaOmer, you'll be lucky if you get 30 seconds. The crowds are so horrendous. So the truth is, it's not so pashut. Meron is a makam kaddish for sure, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai's kever is a makam kaddish for tefillah for sure. Even the Brisker Rav, who was the last person in the world who was into kivrei tzaddikim, this is not a Brisker thing. When he was sick, he asked Rav Shach to go to Meron to be mispalel for him. So Meron is 100% a makam kaddish. But does it have to be connected to Lag BaOmer? Lav dafka. Sometimes it might be better to go on another day, not Lag BaOmer, where you can have more kavana. It's not such a carnival atmosphere. Nevertheless, what the Vel says about Meron is every person should go to Meron once in their lives. Then they say, but no more. You go through it. It's something to experience. I wouldn't automatically recommend it for everybody. Although, as I say, the Etzem Kever of Meron is a very, very, it's a holy place. In fact, Ad Kedei Kach, there are some shittas. Now, I want to emphasize these are minority opinions that we don't paskin like. So do not make a mistake. But some say the kedusha of the tzaddikim are so great that they're not considered dead. As Chazal say, tzaddikim are alive even in their death. So there are some shittas that actually permit a kohen to go into the room of the kever, because even though a kohen is not allowed to become tamei to a mace, these great tzaddikim, particularly Rashbi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, is not metamei. But again, I want to repeat, this is minority. Certainly basic halacha, 99 out of the 100 poskim say that Kohanim have to be very, very, very careful. And again, if any of you are planning to go to Meron, let me just mention that the laws of the transfer of Tumah are extremely complicated, and there's a lot of hidden traps that people aren't aware of. Let me give you an example. It's obvious, of course, that a Kohen cannot be in the same room with the kever. That's obvious, because that's being under the same ohel. But, everyone knows that, so a Kohen cannot go into the room, the Kohen has to be outside. But the problem is, when you have big crowds, and you have a continuous group of people from the kever outside, they might constitute a continuation of the ohel. So the tumah kind of leaves the room, and it travels like under the arms of people, and eventually a kohen could be subject. So when you have like continuous crowds from a kever to the outside. The emes is, that itself is a chashash of tuma traveling that Kohanim need to be aware of. So that's maybe even another lag ba-omer risk. Again, during the year, it's not going to be such a risk because you're not going to have a continuous, unbroken crowd like that. But in lag ba-omer, you might have a continuous wall or a continuous roof, so to speak, where the people themselves become a roof that conveys the tumah. You want to say?
Even if they're not touching each other?
So, if they're close enough, if there's less than a tefach between them, and again, lag ba-omer, you are touching. I mean, I remember I took my son to Meron when he was maybe 8 or 9, and we're in Meron, and I'm holding his hand. I mean, there are whatever 500,000 people, there are 300,000 people there, and you feel you're losing your child. It's like the crowds are so powerful. Right? So I remember I literally did some football stuff. I literally had to just banged in just to get free of the crowd, and of course, as you know, Rachmana litzlan, 2 years ago, because of the crowding, I mean, there were tragic deaths. So I mean, at least in my time, it was more of just almost a funny memory, but unfortunately, it did turn into great tragedies as well. But okay. So we have these two different reasons why Lag BaOmer became a festive day. One is, it is the day that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim stopped dying, and the other is, it is the celebration of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, either his yahrzeit, if it's Yom Shemes Bo Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, or the day that he revealed the Zohar to Klal Yisrael, or both things at the same time. The day that he died was the day that he revealed the Zohar to Klal Yisrael. So I want to talk about the first theme, that Lag BaOmer was the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. Why should that be so? What is unique about the day of Lag BaOmer that there should be a cessation of a mageva? So you might remember when we learned the Torah Devara, the idea of the 10 spheros, that there are 10 emanations through which God's divine energy gets manifested in the world. The first 3 of the spheros are called God's software, God's muchen, God's brains, meaning they're not yet manifest. They're kind of God's thought processes, and they are keser, crown, chachma, wisdom, bina, understanding. So we're not dealing with Hashem's mental operations, but eventually the muchen turn into midas. The lower 7 are midas. Midas are emotional aspects of divinity that get revealed in the world. So we're going to talk about the lower 7 emanations. Chesed, loving kindness; Gevura, strength; Tiferes, beauty; Hod is glory. Netzach, eternity; Hod, glory; Yesod is foundation; Malchus is kingship. These are called midas. Unlike the Keser, Chachma, Bina, which are called Mochen, these are called midas, 7 midas. And these are different aspects of divine energy that get manifested in the world at different times. Now, you know that each week of Sfira correlates to one of those lower 7 Sfiras. So the first week of Sfira is the week of Chesed. That's the week of Pesach itself, the week of Chesed. The second week of Sfira is the week of Gevura. The third week of Sfira is Tiferes. The fourth is Hod. The fourth is Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. Now, where it gets a little more complicated is that because there are 7 days in a week, so kishem that every week is keneged one of the Sfiras, every day within that week also connects to one of the Sfiras. So, for example, the first day of counting the Omer, which of course is the second day of Pesach. And you can see this in many Siddurim, I think even in the article Siddur, is called the day of Chesed, Sheba Chesed. The day of loving kindness in the week of loving kindness. Pretty strong. The second day of Sfira is called Gevura Sheba Chesed, the midah of inner strength within Chesed. Now don't confuse day 2 of week 1 with day 1 of week 2. Day 2 of week 1 is the Gevura that is within Chesed. Day 1 of week 2 is called Chesed Shebe Gevura, the Chesed that is within Gevura. Meaning, each Sfira contains in microcosm the other spheres. It's like a hologram. In Gevura are the 7 spheres. There's a Chesed of Gevura, a Gevura Shebe Gevura, a Teferet Shebe Gevura, etc. So that's why every single day of the 49 days of the Omer will have a day and a week correlated to the spheres. Chesed Sheba Chesed, Gevura Sheba Chesed, etc. Now, we also know, in fact, many people say this, it's in many Siddurim. You know, you count the Omer and you say the day of this and the week of that. Now, we also know that the 7 spheres, the 7 manifestations of divinity, of divine energy, also correspond to 7 human beings who were said to be the repositories of the representations of that spiritual koach. So Avraham Avinu represents the human representation of the koach of Chesed. Yitzchak Avinu, who was a korban, represents Gevura. Yaakov, who synthesizes, balances, integrates the Chesed of Avraham and the Gevura of Yitzchak, is the midah of Tiferes. Netzach, eternity, is Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll explain that. Hod, glory, is Aram. Yesod, foundation, is Yosef. Note that it's out of order. Yosef is number 6, Moshe is number 4. And then finally, Malchus, kingship, represents David HaMelech. Okay? So as a result, week 1 of Sfira is Keneged Avraham, week 2 is Yitzchak, week 3 is Yaakov. So now, let's plot Lag BaOmer on the chart. Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the Omer. Now the 33rd day of the Omer is in the 5th week, right? Even though it's a little confusing, we say, how would we count the 33rd day of the Omer? This is the 33rd day of the Omer that is 4 weeks and 5 days. So you understand, even though you said 4 weeks, but you're in the 5th week. You're in the 5th week. So Lag BaOmer is the 5th day of the 5th week. The 5th day of the 5th week. Now, Sfira number 5 is Hod, glory, and that is Aaron. So Lag BaOmer's plotting, Lag BaOmer's name would be Hod Sheba Hod, the day of glory within the week of glory. It's Aaron squared. Aaron raised to a power of 2. Now we know that Aaron's spiritual kayach manifested itself primarily in Ohev Shalom V'Rodev Shalom, a lover of peace, a pursuer of peace. Let's go back a little bit to the underlying Aveira that caused the death of Rabbi Akiva's students. they didn't show proper kavod to each other. Right? Lo nahagu kavod ze leze. How do we understand that? Does that mean they were rude? Does that mean they called each other names? You're an idiot. I mean, these are the students of Rabbi Akiva. And remember, Rabbi Akiva himself taught, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is the most important klal of the Torah. How could his Talmidim not be nagu kavod ze leze? So Rav Shimon Hirsch actually explains that the word kavod itself has a very interesting meaning. Kavod, honor, respect, comes from the same shirish as kaved. Kaved is heavy, heaviness. What does it mean, heaviness? Even in English, when we talk about somebody as being a very significant person, we might say, in a slang way, he's a real heavyweight in his field. That's not referring to body weight, it refers to eminence. A person has weight, a person has significance, a person has gravitas. So Rav Hirsch says the following: if you would have seen the behavior of Rabbi Akiva's students, there is no question they were polite to each other, they had derech eretz to each other, they followed the halacha, but they didn't see the other as weighty and significant. They didn't see the chashivas of the other person. They were nice to each other the way you're nice to an inferior. No, you're nice. Noblesse oblige. You're nice. But you didn't see the other as chashuv. You didn't see the other as significant. So this was not an external breakdown of behavior. It was the attitude that you have towards the other. Now, you can be very polite to somebody, but in your heart, they don't really matter very much. That's the chisaron of her says of lo nagu kavod ze leze, not seeing the chashivas of each other. Now, there's still going to be a problem. How could Rabbi Akiva's students not have that characteristic? It's hard to know. I don't really have a tremendous answer. Maybe they had such a great Rebbe, they felt they didn't need each other. Meaning, I don't need to learn from you, because I have Rabbi Akiva. Maybe that contributed to it. They weren't machshav each other. Now, we know that Aaron's midah of Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom moves in exactly the opposite way. He brought Shalom to people by building them up, by making them feel special and loved. He would go over to a husband who was fighting with the wife and say, "Oh, your wife is so sad that she fought with you. She wants to apologize, even though she didn't." And he'd go to the wife and say the same thing. He built people up not by criticizing them, not by giving them musar, not by telling them how bad they were, but the other way around. He built them up. He made them see their chashivas. And the way life works is, when you feel you're somebody chashuv, you automatically become a better person. You become a better person not by realizing how bad you are. You become a better person by realizing how good you are. Gee, I'm so good. How could I behave that way? I mean, there's a chashivas here. So, here's the thing. If Rabbi Akiva's students died because they didn't see the chashivas in each other, but Lag BaOmer comes, and the spiritual aura of Lag BaOmer is a double dose of Aaron, Hod Shebahod, who's Ohev Shalom, v'Rodev Shalom. So the spiritual hashpa'ah of Lag BaOmer allowed the Talmidim to transcend the lo nagu kavod ze leze, either permanently or at least for that day. Maybe after it went, then they continued to die. because it was only a short-term effect. But that is why the Magefa stopped on Lag BaOmer, because the hashpah of Aaron HaKohen, both in terms of day and week, that spiritual kolach that entered the world, liberated them from the Aveira of Loi Nahagu Kavai Zelazah. And that is why the Magefa stopped. Because when the reason stopped, these symptoms stopped. The sickness, the plague, came for a reason. When they became even temporarily liberated from that reason, they were liberated from the Magefa. So on that level, Lag BaOmer is a celebration of Achdus and Avas Yisrael. Because that's why the Magefa stopped. Because of the Midah of Aaron. Oyev Shalom, Bereidev Shalom. But now, let's look a little bit at the second reason for Lag BaOmer. The Kesher to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now here, in Maseches Brachos, there's a famous machlokas between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Yishmael on the pasuk in Kriya Shema, where Hashem says, if you do my mitzvahs, v'yasafta diganecha, you will be able to gather your grain. That's my bracha to you, Hashem says. You'll have rain, and you will gather your produce. So Rabbi Yishmael says, a commonsensical observation, we see from here that the Torah permits you to work and make a parnasa, because that's Hashem's bracha. You keep your mitzvahs, you will gather your grain. How can I gather my grain? I'm supposed to learn. The answer is, the Torah is telling me there's a heter of parnasa. That makes sense. Well, it didn't make sense to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, you're going to gather your grain? A person is going to plow when it's time to plow, and plant when it's time to plant, and harvest when it's time to harvest. When is he going to learn? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai actually says, the Asafta de Ganecha is when Klal Yisrael is not doing the will of God. If they would really and truly do the will of God, their malacha would be done by other people. Either they'd win lotteries or Goyim would come. And therefore, if Shimon Bar Yochai says, the true derech of Avodas Hashem is not to seek a parnasa. Now, Taisus asked the obvious kasha. How can Rav Shimon Bar Yochai say the Asafta de Ganecha is when the Jewish people are not doing Hashem's will? What are you talking about? It says, V'haya im shamoa tishmu. If you listen to Hashem, you'll be given this bracha. Obviously, we're not talking about people who are not doing Hashem's will. So his answer is, you're right. Avada is talking about righteous people, but it's Eisen v'ein Eisen, but they're not doing the best thing, meaning it's second best. Meaning, righteous people may make a mistake of parnasa, so Hashem will give them the parnasa. But Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says, no parnasa. Hashem will take care of you. Don't waste your time on jobs, making money. Hashem will take care of you. Dedicate yourself legamrei to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Gemara says in Maseches Brachos, many people followed the path of Rabbi Yishmael, combining parnasa and Torah learning, and Hashem blessed them. And many people followed the path, or some people followed the path of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, in which they said, I'm not going to seek any parnasa at all. Hashem is going to bring the money to my door. And unfortunately, they starved. Which means the Gemara is telling us that for most people, they have to follow the path of Rabbi Yishmael. The path of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is not the path for most people. The Gra says there are yechidim in the generation who can reach the level of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and it did work for him. Remember, for 12 years he was in a cave, and the birds brought him meat and fruit and water and all these things. It worked for him. He was saying, it worked for me, it could work for everybody. The Gemara says it doesn't work for everybody. So, when you look at Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, you see a person who was so unbelievably great in his emunah, his righteousness, his kedusha. And by the way, we sang Friday night, the Shabbos before Lag BaOmer, we sang Bar Yochai. So if you ever look at the translation or look at it, I mean, you see the shlachos, the praises of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So amazing, amazing, amazing. The holiness of Bar Yochai. So he represents the epitome of Kedusha, in which there was not even a requirement of ishtadlus. It didn't have to work, didn't have to do anything. Hashem will take care of you. Now this is not a madrega for most of us. We got to make plans, we got to work. Of course it's from Hashem, but we have to do ishtadlus. He was on a level beyond any ishtadlus. And the Gemara says, when people try to imitate him, it's not going to work. But it worked for him. This was his madrega. And on Lag BaOmer, we try to be makasher ourselves to the holiness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, even if it's just for one day. So now I want to point out that on some level, there's a shtickle stira, a little bit of a contradiction between the two themes of Lag BaOmer. On one hand, it's Hod Shebahod that connects us to Aaron, which is about Avas Yisrael and Achdus, unity, seeing the good in others. On the other level, it's the kesher to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that says the only worthy activity in life is learning and avodas Hashem, and everything else is batel, mavutel, wasteful, stupid, foolish. And that's the other thing we think about on Lag BaOmer. Now the problem is, in real life, these two lessons are often in contradiction, because what often happens is, the more passionate I get about the importance of learning, and Torah is the ikar, and nothing matters but Torah, I tend to look down at people who are not holding there. I tend to say, whether it's parents, whether it's whatever it is, he says, they don't really matter so much. Because they're isek in frivolity. They're isek in shtus v'hevel. So it tends to be, as you get more fiery, as you get more like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, you move away from an Avas Yisrael and an appreciation of others. And the other way around. As you become more tolerant, more accepting, sometimes your passion for the primacy of Torah gets weakened. I'm okay, you're okay, oh, this guy's in medical school, law school, great, everything's good. And that may water down your commitment. So what Lag BaOmer is actually telling us to do is you got to keep both ideas within you at the same time, even though they're a little contradictory. Avas Yisrael, tolerance, acceptance, respect, understanding that different people have different drachim. That's the midah of Hod Shebahod. And then we have Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, in which you have a fiery connection to Torah and avodas Hashem as the most important part of life. Don't allow your passion for Torah to dilute your Avas Yisrael. And don't allow your Avas Yisrael and your acceptance to dilute your passion for Torah. And therefore within Lag BaOmer, we have both of those ideas operating at the same time. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit of the hashkafa of Lag BaOmer. Okay, anyway, happy Lag BaOmer, and
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.